Want to bring in my panel. Leslie Vinjamuri is the president and CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. She joins us live from the conference in Davos, and our chief U.S. national affairs correspondent, Jeff Zeleny, back with us live in Washington. Leslie, let me start with you. Davos, traditionally an event for international cooperation, but the reality is that European leaders are on the defence. There is no doubt about it. Take a listen to what EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen had to say earlier.
Europe needs to adjust to a new security architecture and realities that we are now facing. And this is why Europe is preparing its own security strategy, which we plan to publish later this year. And as part of this, we are upgrading our Arctic strategy too. And at the heart of this will be the fundamental principle: it is for sovereign people to decide their own future.
So the Europeans are trying to work out how, frankly, they rein Trump in or they deal with him. You know, a year in, what does this playbook look like? What do you make of this playbook? How do you describe Donald Trump's playbook at this point?
Well, I think the one thing that we've seen consistently is that the president is aiming to disrupt. He is really pursuing basically the exact opposite of a rules-based order. His entire way of governing is to unsettle, disrupt, create uncertainty, in part to get a better bargain, to get a better deal, and to really fundamentally reorder and rethink international relations. He's sort of the opposite of what I think America, with the exception of him in his first term, has been trying to do for 8 decades. So we have, this question of the international order clearly gone, as it said in the national security strategy. But here at Davos, I think there's a real question within that about the transatlantic partnership, which is, a distinct feature of that international order. And they're all bets are off. To the clip that you just played from Ursula von der Leyen. There's a real question here. Absolutely, but how much time will it take? Europe is investing in its own security. That is the most significant change, perhaps the scale, but there's still a real question about speed, and it's going to take time. And in that time, America very clearly has a very big hand to play, a very big upper hand to play.
Yeah, and it's not as if the Europeans haven't been facing this all year, and indeed shouldn't have been warned about this. It almost feels like rinse and repeat. I mean, this is like, 2-3 times now. I mean, I'm thinking of the Munich Security Conference, just 6 weeks or so into Donald Trump's administration, where the first really big salvos were launched by his vice president, J.D. Vance. Look, stand by. I want to bring Jeff in on this. Trump facing plenty of problems at home, Jeff. You have the protests against ICE, increasing frustration about affordability and healthcare. He's underwater on a number of issues when polling across the board is done. How is Trump's focus on Greenland and other international issues playing out amongst US voters? I think it's really important to kind of nail this one.
Becky, it's very much intertwined. I mean, for all of the focus that the White House and President Trump has had on Greenland over the last several weeks, voters here in the United States simply are not responding in kind. Take a look at these numbers. These are numbers we do not see really on any other topic there. 25%, just a quarter of voters favor the U.S. taking control of Greenland. 75% do not favor it. But look at the breakdown among independent voters. Of course, those are among the most important sect. 82% of independent voters oppose this idea. Even among Republicans, it is a near split. Republicans have largely gone along with most everything the president has wanted or talked about. Not on this matter. We've seen Republican officials on Capitol Hill, senators, representatives saying, no, this is something that would be a red line that's crossed. We'll see about that. We'll see if there's anything that can be dissuaded for him to change his mind here or if he goes through with it. But among the broad cross-section of American voters, there simply is not an appetite for this. One of the reasons, perhaps, he hasn't really explained. He's never really delivered an address to the country, if you will, saying why this is necessary. He's had a variety of answers for this. It started back in 2018, 2019, during his first term in office. He talked about it as a real estate deal. He talked about seeing something on a map that he liked. Now, of course, it's a matter of security, but there's really been no persistent or a consistent message here. But Americans are not in favor of this, and this is contributing to his lower overall job approval numbers. And one of the reasons that almost 6 in 10 Americans say the first year of his second term has been something of a failure.
Leslie, I want to just concentrate for a moment on global military spending, which has reached an all-time high, $2.7 trillion in 2024, up more than 9%. That is the steepest increase since the end of the Cold War. And that comes with economic and social trade-offs. Let's be quite clear, the debt bells are ringing really loudly for many of the world's sort of erstwhile most important economies. And this is also at a time when global populism is surging. How concerning is that number from an historical perspective?
Look, it's deeply concerning. I think, though, when it comes to spending on defense and national security, it's not a global question. It's very much a national question for each individual state. But the point still holds. It comes at a severe trade-off, especially for European states that have are spending a lot of money on welfare at home, that are struggling to invest in their services. Many economies needing to do more to improve the things that they've historically been good on, but that are suffering. In the UK, that's obviously, health, transportation, any number of things that make investment better. And when you're faced with having to make those trade-offs, we're seeing the first thing that goes is spending on foreign assistance and development, and that's going to have a global implication, which will eventually reverberate back and make security challenges worse. But when it comes to welfare, people are looking at this and they're saying, in the United States, why is Donald Trump so focused on national security, on foreign policy, and not on affordability? We're seeing this across states in Europe where populist leaders are easily playing to the crowds. The one possible solution, and I think European states in particular need to focus on this, is to make spending on defense a part of a job strategy. And you can do that if you don't make spending on defense about buying American products. President Trump wants European leaders to buy American defense products. Europeans know, though, that they need to invest in their own defense industrial base, and that could be a job strategy. But boy, in the short term, populist leaders are really succeeding in whipping up anti-liberal, anti-defense sentiment, and it's a real risk, especially in Europe.
Yeah, Jeff, and Jeff, Donald Trump is all about an era of strength, of power, of military might. It was just in the last couple of days we heard his sort of second in command, as it were, Stephen Miller, talking about how important this new era of strength and power and military might is. So many headlines coming at us rapid fire. The military action in Venezuela, the threat of something similar in Iran, the demand for Greenland. Frankly, it can be a challenge, certainly for those who will be watching us today, to observe this administration and also to observe the sort of follow-up or lack thereof on any one of these massive stories. Is that part of the Trump strategy to sort of flood the zone, as we've discussed in the past, to distract people from watching what the administration actually does after all this sort of shock and awe?
There's no question about it. Flood the zone and also really try and keep friend and foe alike off balance. I mean, that has been one of the hallmarks of the Trump presidency. One of the differences in this second term, I think, is just the exhibition of of a power, extraordinary executive authority, really stretching from the military to foreign affairs. And I think that, yes, flooding the zone is a part of his strategy, but he does believe most everything he's saying. And no, of course he won't accomplish all of this, and he moves on from one thing to another thing. But the question here is, at what point does the exhaustion sort of take over? I mean, he is a lame duck president. This is his final term in office. There's no doubt that Trumpism will continue on and on for years to come, but he knows his time is limited. So that is one of the things that he is absolutely legacy building and trying to acquire, and he is in that acquisition mode. We will see if he gets his wings clipped, though, in this midterm election year. That's another reason he's trying to do so much right now. A year from now, as he enters his third year, things could be entirely different, perhaps with a Democratic majority in Congress, and that, of course, would make all the difference in the world. Becky?
Yeah, those midterms, of course, in November this year. That seems a long way off at the moment. Leslie, Jeff, thank you very much indeed to both of you.